Namaskar, everyone. And, last few weekends I've been starting the conversation with the beautiful, mentioning about the beautiful weather here in Bangalore. And today is no different. So at 24 degrees, clear sky, clean air, and probably one of the best positive moments of this particular lockdown. But otherwise, the Bangalore is started to look very much the pre-COVID days. So buses are back on the road, black and yellow auto rickshaws are back on the road, and yeah, I mean, you're seeing a lot of action and movement, barring the containment zone. So yeah, life is coming back to normal in some way or the other. I just hope that when things get back into the normal cell, we start realizing what we value the most, and we also look at the pollution and emission and climate, a topic which is very close to my heart, but discussion for some other day. So today's discussion is about the mental health of the society in the corporate environment. What's happening right now is a very curious blend of the two different words. We do not need to be ready for work. We can actually wear our home clothes and get into a real strategic conversations. So are we shedding some kind of a dimension of the professionalism which we all tend to know? Our bosses or our customers are taking advantage of our captivity and probably sparing us with no spare time, since there's no travel or meeting related LVs anymore. Children are also getting frustrated because they are not used to seeing a parent's invisible captivity, I may say. And there is no third place like work from Starbucks. In fact, it is rapidly becoming as no place you wish to be. And quite obviously, this topic of discussion today, in some context, came from the suicide of Sushant Singh Rajput as well. And but in corporate India, the issue is not about nepotism. It is a host of other factors that lead to employees' dismay. Uh, One of them I may say, could be the old boys club, IIT, IM, Nexus kind of a thing. I have personally been asked by many CEOs that do I belong to one of those clubs, and as if they will not like to keep a company if it is otherwise, or regional biases, which we all know, South India, North India, these are still very much prevalent, and or the entitlement of nastiness and how being insulting and rude being a prerogative of leadership. I mean, these are the few things that we kind of know of. I also know of some top bosses, who have been very, very strong when it came down to performance. And they said that, yes, this is how it has been, but never crossed the line in terms of the insult to an employee. But I've also seen a lot of specimens who have never given, a single iota of constructive feedback, but have insulted the employees at every front. Now, every day, but there is no space about the corporate bullying in the modern corporations for sure. Now, every day, millions and millions of Indians, we are facing a mental health crisis, and the attitude of the bosses and the employers needs to change. The culture of the companies needs to change to make sure that we do not face those kind of mental harassment which is probably been happening. Now, how do we create a workplace culture that values mental health? How do you replace the negative stigma with the affirmative approach? Now, health and well-being, juggling homeschooling and work, financial stability, fear of job loss. These are today's there in the mind of every employee. And how is a very positive communication has been flown by the leaders and the companies in today's time. So today to discuss all this, we have a very eminent and a diverse panel. And what is also special about today's panel is that we have people from every generation, so you actually have a very varied thought that's going to come in. So allow me to welcome Ajay Chacko, co-founder and CEO of Arré, Arjun Nohwar, Director and Regional Head APAC for Uber for Business, Vaidheesh, former Vice President South Asia and Managing Director GSK and Senior Advisor to the Healthcare Industry, Puneet Chandok, President India and SAARC at Amazon Internet Services, Srinivas Jan, Executive Director and CMO, SBI Mutual Fund. And to moderate the conversation, we have Pooja Goyal, entrepreneur and founder, IntelliThought's Early Learning Center. In fact, my son started his school journey here. And all are very dear friends. And in fact, I'm very, very thankful for them taking our time and discussing such a pertinent topic today. I hope you all have also filled in your cuppa, because next 90 minutes is going to be really engaging and insightful conversation. I will return back after this and probably try to know a little bit more about our speakers towards the end of the conversation. There are some questions at the poll as well. Take some time out to fill those questions too. So Pooja, a very warm welcome, and the screen is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Deepak, for that introduction and setting the stage. As you were talking about the whole idea of the IIT, IIM Boys Club, I do belong to some of those institutions, but I had my perspective, or I experienced that as a woman. So that kind of triggers some thought. And as you were talking about it, a story came to mind that might be very pertinent to this conversation and might help set the stage for our discussion. But first of all, thank you very much for bringing this set of fantastic people together for this important conversation about mental and emotional well-being during these times, during these crisis-ridden times. So the story about 10 years ago, and it has stayed with me. He learned to swim very late in life as an adult. So, he started to swim, but he still had his fear of water. So whenever he got an opportunity, he tried to overcome that fear by actually putting him in that situation and trying to swim. He was vacationing with his family once in, I think, Hawaii with his young daughter and his wife. It was a nice, clear day. The water was cool, so he decided to go for a swim in the ocean. He entered the ocean, he started to swim and felt excellent. He felt like, wow, it's gorgeous and I can swim and I have gotten so much better. He literally got into a flow. He wanted to go to a place where there were some corals. So he continued to go and he was feeling very strong about it. He said, wow, what a fantastic decision. Finally, all the effort and all the hard work that I have been putting in is paying off. And I'm able to swim here. Then time came to turn back. He turned back and started to swim back and realized that he was making all the right strokes, but was not moving forward. He began to panic. He was quite worried about what was happening. How was he going to reach the shore? He continued at it. He started to kick himself for not wearing a life jacket, for not wearing flippers, for just making such a rash decision to come out into the open ocean. But the sight of the thought of his daughter and wife at the beach, somehow using all of his willpower, he was able to swim back to the ocean. Now, the interesting thing comes when he started reflecting about it. And he realized that when he was going out into the ocean, he was supported by a strong undercurrent, which he did not give any thought to. he thought the reason he was swimming so beautifully, he was in the flow, was because of himself, because of his own strength, because of all the effort that he had put in. It was only when he was swimming against the current did he realize that maybe, actually he started to blame himself for it. That, I did a wrong thing. I did not do enough. I made stupid decision of not wearing a life jacket and come back. So the point that becomes very evident here is that when you as an individual are swimming with the current, you never give it credit for success. You genuinely feel that your achievements are produced because of your sheer merit, your hard work, and that's true to a certain extent. And it can become very, very hard to relate to people who are going through a crisis situation and who are struggling against the current. So in these times, if you take layoff as an example, right, you are kind of being forced to make some of these decisions, getting people to go on leave without pay, on layoffs. And you kind of say, well, yes, it's very hard, but you will get over it. I have been laid off twice in my career. I managed it. I was able to get over it. You'll get over it. No reason to get depressed or anxious. Right? So it can be very hard to make that leap as a person who's going with the current and reach out to a person who's fighting against the current. So with this backdrop, and this is true of many of our stereotypes and biases, I'll kickstart the conversation. I'll start with you, Puneet. You are, of course, the president of AWS Amazon, and Amazon is known to be, you've been a partner at McKinsey, and Amazon is known to be, both organizations are known to be meritocratic, no-nonsense cultures, pretty kind of high on work ethic, on meritocracy. So, how hard or easy it is for you as a leader to think about some of these soft factors and to think about some of the people who might be struggling with issues in this environment, which is all about accomplishment and doing things right?
Pooja, first of all, thank you for sharing the story. It was actually quite inspiring the way you described it. I think back to your question, I really don't think it's difficult, right? It just goes back to the quality of the leader you are, right? I don't think there's a trade-off between insisting on high standards and being human at the same time. I think it's a false trade-off if at least that's the way some people frame it. I think there are 2 or 3 things at least I've realized as I've gone through this, right? One, like every change in life, and this is probably the most massive change we're all going through, there are positives and there are downsides, right? So it's always good to start with the positive and be hopeful, right? And for example, my personal story for the last 20 years, I've never been home this long, right? I've never seen my kids be kids. There is a silver lining, right? So I think just keep reminding ourselves that there are positives and things to be hopeful about. Second is you kind of unpack some of this, right? There are 2 or 3 things that are happening, right? One, as you said, the boundaries are fluid, and boundaries have been fluid for a long while, but now it's getting more accentuated, right? You can't really switch off that easily. Second, a lot of us used to get energy from physical interactions and unstructured conversations and walking into a customer and making a pitch or talking to colleagues. That's gone. And by the way, the tone of conversations has also changed, Pooja. Conversations are not that positive and uplifting anymore, right?
Right.
And then the third, which is probably the most important thing that's playing on all our minds, is what's going through is truly unprecedented, right? We don't have pattern recognition on this, right? And when you really don't know how to pick up patterns, and I'm a structured thinker, what happens is you start fearing the worst, right? And it was Mark Twain who said, I've been through some terrible things in my life. Some of them actually happened, right? And we are suffering more in our imagination than in our reality. And once in a while, you have to go and tell yourself that, listen, not every story that I tell myself is true, right? So that's a little bit of just personal reflection. I think as a leader, going back to the point, there are 2 or 3 things that you need to do, right? One is acknowledge that this is not impacting all of us in the same way, right? There's a big contextual variance. And by the way, even personally, right, within the same day, there are moments when I feel strong and on top of the world. And there are moments when I feel weak like hell, right? And you got to be okay with that and acknowledge that, right? And people are taking it differently. And when you're feeling weak, you go and ask for help. When you're feeling strong, you offer help. And that's one of the things that at least I'm trying to drive as a conversation around my teams, right? And kind of keep that in mind. Second, I think be vulnerable, right? Be open and authentic. Nobody's got a grip on this. So if you go out and say, listen, I've got this under control and I know how the next 6 months, 9 months, next quarter will look like, you'll lose credibility immediately as a leader, right? So I'm not trying to do that at all. And none of us are trying to do that. We're being very clear on what we know, what we don't know, and what we're doing to find out the unknowns, right? And just kind of being honest and upfront about it. And then finally, I think just creating forums and conversations like this, right? And we're having these conversations around our teams all the time. And we used to do an all hands. We've changed that to an all hearts now, right? And again, beyond just the nomenclature and the rhetoric and the words, it's a conversation about not just sweeping under the carpet everything that's not working well, like the number of Zoom calls and meetings and conferences and discussions, but having an open discussion, right? And helping each other out in our moments of weakness, and then offering help when we are feeling strong and good as leaders.
Right. So Puneet, one thread I'll pick up from your point is around, these whole water cooler conversations have gone away, and all hands we used to do, there was still some banter going on. So just changing the vocabulary there to say all hearts. And I struggle with it because you are in these back-to-back meetings. There is the agenda item for each meeting. You just kind of go in there and say, okay, this is what we have to cover today, and go through that. There is very little room for general chit chat. So I actually leave it open to the floor to give any specific examples of what you are doing to either make each meeting a little more all hearts rather than all hands or all agenda, or putting a process in place to enable and bring back that idea of interaction, general fluid interaction.
I maybe can go first.
Sure, Srinivas.
It's a tough thing, right? You never can replicate a physical chit chat water cooler environment. One of the things I've started doing, it's not more a company phenomena, but my phenomena, is that I expect the teams to start meeting 5 minutes early, and I, as a boss, actually join 5 minutes late, or at least. So it's giving them some time to, do their personal chit chat.
Right.
I mean, it's explicitly told that I won't join. You can start off. I'll come 5 minutes late. And I don't do that every day. I do that once in a week or so. That kind of helps them to actually feel a little more comfortable that the boss is not around and I can have those private conversations. That's more me than the company. But I guess there are a couple of other things that, people have started doing is that, a large company like ours, which has branches, 250 odd branches across the country, we've started knowing employee a little more, even better, because, they all work from home, they're on calls, there are kids crying in the background, there's pressure cooker going. So we want to understand what's getting cooked, what's happening to their kids when we have those conversations on video calls. So I think it's a little more human than just very clinical. We've tried to learn from that, but again, that's more a leadership style. I don't expect an organizations to actually put a format around it. These are smaller things, but personally, I think most of our leaders in our own company have become more empathetic than ever before about when people work from home. Clearly, because the productivity actually is much higher because you're always working, you're always available work from home.
Right.
I guess these are smaller things, but you really, at the end of the day, you just can't replicate a banter or a chit chat that happens in an informal environment in an organization. Right.
The other thread that I'll pick up from what Puneet said was around vulnerability, right? That is, when we've been this whole narrative around vulnerability and being an authentic leader has been going up over the last few years. So Vaidheesh, I'll come to you and ask you, the mental health crisis, despite all of this, just continues to grow. And, there was a Lancet study in December 2019, even before the pandemic struck, which said that 1 in 7 Indians struggle from mental health disorders, and about 45 million struggle with depression, 45 million struggle with anxiety. Um, it can be very hard to put your finger on it as a leader as to what is going on. So my question to you is, how real do you think it is, and do you see it around you, and how do you even begin to understand that there might be an emotional or a mental health challenge going on?
Yeah, well, Pooja, what you said is absolutely correct. I'm not sure it's just only in India. In my health care industry experience of over now 38 years, I've had a chance to work on mental health as a subject, because of course we do have drugs to deal with that, but of course whether it's a bipolar or whether it is a schizophrenia kind of stuff. There is a society called the Stigma Society, which is basically trying to deal with this whole concept of mental health. It's a big stigma, just not only in India, and a country like India and some other older countries, mental health is always seen in a very different light. Nobody wants to go and get their issues sorted out, right? Unlike in Western world, having a shrink is as good as going to a dentist, right? So as far as our organization is concerned, at least I can say for myself, like what we have something called as the Employee Assistance Program. And it's widely advertised within our company in GSK. And also what we felt is that sometimes the mental health challenges, people don't actually pick up the phone and have a call. So what we do is that we have an in-plant clinician. We also invite, and we have various sessions, and we give an opportunity for people to have a informal chat, and also on an anonymous basis, people can have a conversation about the challenges with those clinicians. Now, is it easy? How many people now? I can say that there are people who came out and resolved the challenges. There are people who don't resolve the challenges. But frankly, in my opinion, this is a big issue that we as a corporates have to attend to it. And we put some good experts in our organization as a resource for our employees. And I don't think we are going to be spared during the pandemic, because in pandemic, it's going to get accentuated, as British Medical Journal clearly mentioned, this whole concept of moral injury. And there are two ways in people can react to during this pandemic time, where people can blame themselves for not things happening, particularly in the healthcare field, where some of the doctors go through this whole trauma of seeing a lot of stuff, they're making some tough decisions. And similar the case with the family, people do make tough decisions. And there are women at home, they're now doing multiple things as compared to men at home. And how do they manage this during this time, attending to the digital calls, attend to the child's education, putting them through their classes, at the same time manage. So we have had this kind of cases also being attended by our counselors. It is a very important topic. And only thing is that our objective should be to figure out how do we support. There is something called as the opposite of moral injury is also growth. There are people also grow out of these scenarios where people develop resilience, people develop phenomenal skill to deal with this challenging time. So as a company that our aim is to figure out how do we provide an opportunity for people to move into the other side of dealing with the growth rather than dealing with through positive conversations. And of course, we can talk about it a little later, but I think these are very real challenges, mental health, and I fully believe every organization should look at providing resources.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This stigma that you talked about, Vaidheesh, this is very real. It is very hard to come out in the open and talk about it, and somehow this is seen as a sign of mental weakness, whereas a physical problem is seen as something that's beyond your control. A mental health issue is seen as something that is in your control and you should be able to fix it. So I think just understanding some of the mechanics of this mental health issue could also help, where what is leading to stress, it is an interplay of neurotransmitters and hormones and the kind of stimuli you are getting from outside, right? So I'll just kind of carry on this conversation on the whole idea of stimuli. One of the terms that I recently learned is called doom surfing or doom scrolling. And so Ajay, I'll come over to you, where what it means is essentially mindlessly scrolling through news, from one bad news to another. And, you've of course led large media organizations like Forbes and TV18, and now you are a founder of Arré. And media has been vilified a lot in this space of fake news, putting all sorts of scandalous stories outside, polarization. Would love to hear your perspective, Ajay, on the role that media is currently playing in either perpetuating some of these challenges that we are talking about and can play, and what is the role it can play to improve the image so far.
Thanks, Pooja. So one caveat: I've clearly moved away from the news business. We're in the entertainment side right now, and that's primarily because like you said, I mean, news was getting extremely politicized once upon a time when we were leaving, and that whole buyout was happening. But more than that, now I think it's getting increasingly polarized across any divisions you can find. So I think the less said about that, the better. But I want to come back to the context of the discussion, which is, and I'll take off from there, onto the media bit, because that comes later in my view. See, I think it's a question of priorities also. I've actually managed large organizations with more than 3,000-4,000 people, and now we manage a relatively small gig as an entrepreneur. And I've realized that, one cannot take up the mantle of mental health in the true sense, because we are not qualified as organizations or as individuals, as managers or as entrepreneurs, as leaders, to really delve into mental health issues, if there are any. Frankly, those are chemical plus issues, which I think, needs better, kind of help. At best, we put physicians in our, large organizations to come and check, but I don't think we've ever invested in psychiatrists and what have you, and because it was beyond the mandate, because there was no real mandate. So I really think that if there is, I mean, if you move beyond the real, hardcore mental health issues, which actually need really serious attention, therefore I would not want to trivialize that out here, saying, okay, that can be solved by discussions alone, though one part of it is discussions. The other bit, which actually corporate India or workspaces or jobs add to people's lives, is where we can come in as leaders, as entrepreneurs, as which is, can you reduce the level of insecurity, which is really the driving force of all sort of stress, and may lead to some amount of emotional issues, definitely, if not mental health issues, right? So I think over the years, I've realized that we actually go a lot with the people who are expressive and who talk, and therefore we take that as the kind of front line of what needs to be done in terms of priority. But really, I mean, the guys who actually need to be taken care of are the people who do not have the opportunity to express themselves, right? So and there I think actions matter louder than words, much. I mean, actions speak louder than words, and that's really the philosophy that I've kind of tried to kind of sort of adopt over the years and learn from our mistakes. For example, in this crisis, I realized that the real true action that we could have taken is not sacked anybody. Now it's a tough action to take, because that you can use this kind of crisis to correct business models, which a lot of companies have done. You can actually get your cost structures back to the way they ought to be done. There were lots of case to be made for actually going and saying, okay, fine, let's do the sacking part, and let's not look at a across the board, survival mechanism that however, kind of ill-informed that might be, however bad it may look like on, in the balance sheet. But we went ahead and took that large call of saying, okay, no, we will not sack anyone. We will try and, ride through this crisis. We will all take cards. We will do whatever, right? So in my previous avatars, we've not been able to do those kind of things. Maybe because of the size of the organization, maybe because there was too much pressure, maybe because of the stage of life. But I've realized that one job cut can create so much insecurity in 30, 40, 50% of the workforce that, no matter what mental well-being seminar or emotional coaching you do, that cannot take away the insecurity that kind of action brings in. So if you ask me, the tangible in my view is to go by hard actions that actually, reduce the level of insecurity rather than just go with conversational stuff while taking tough calls, right? So damage control is obviously the next best option. If you can limit the primary damage, and I'm sure there are ways of doing that, because no company really, that is raising $2-3 billion needs to, kind of chop the last mile 500 people to kind of survive a crisis, right? I've seen that much business to tell you that's a shortcut that a lot of people choose to take in this. So I'll probably be sounding a little harsh in that side, but I think that has led to a lot of insecurity amongst employees, and that's really creating more of a crisis, especially in the segments that are not expressive, cannot do these work from home calls, cannot have does not have access to colleagues all the time, whether it's on Zoom calls or whatever, right? So relatively less first world-ish, would I say, right? That I think is, if you ask me, all of us can reprioritize in some way, that we need to really look at people who cannot talk and communicate as much, or cannot fight back, or cannot even do not even have the option of saying, okay, I can think about my mental well-being, when their actual well-being, emotional well-being is being firstly challenged. So that's one part that I thought I'll put across as my perspective on the issue of media. I think you're absolutely right that I think this whole doom surfing, or what do you call it, it has become so endemic to our lives that especially because of WhatsApp and other messenger tools, that everybody is actually forwarding stuff that actually seems like, okay, this is the next worst thing to happen, this is the next worst thing to happen. Even if you look at media coverage today, even in a city like Bombay, where we have 27,000 active cases, it will still be talking about 60,000 as the number, right? I don't understand why we would keep reporting headline numbers if the number of active cases is what really matters, right? So I would clearly take the blame that yes, media has been headline seeking even during the time of crisis. If you ask me, and I'm not saying it's the media's job to reduce people's insecurities, but it cannot be sensationalizing things that are actually out of context. And a lot of data reporting in India, a lot of news reporting in India, even by legitimate sources, are actually bordering on sensational. And I think that adds to the panic, especially for people who actually think about being cocooned in this world, right? So in Bombay, I think it's a very, very interesting example. We've already probably seen the peak of that curve. Yet people keep talking about rising cases. Yet people in the affluent areas don't want to step out, don't want to let their maids and drivers in, despite the fact that the government has said that you cannot do that. So I think while we talk again of issues that affect people who are well off, I think we need to first recalibrate whether we are actually being good human beings and actually trying to take care of people who are not well off, right? I think the segment or the population that gets affected by these kind of things actually need to be taken care of first before we even go into emotional well-being of people who earn like 25 lakhs a year or 40 lakhs a year, right? So that's my limited point there. And I think media, especially news media, I agree with you. I don't have a solution for it, but I think I have actually, personally implemented a simple solution, which is I have actually cut off news television for completely out of my life. The last 2.5 years. I don't know whether that's a good thing to say publicly, but yes, I have done that. And the only thing I've not been able to get, I'm not on any social media, by the way, strangely, despite running a digital media company. And the only thing I've not been able to get off is WhatsApp.
WhatsApp is hard. World runs on WhatsApp now. That's the problem.
Sorry about that.
No, lots to unpack there, Ajay. Thank you. I'll take your point earlier about what is in the control of a leader and what is beyond control, and contrast it with, we have Arjun here who heads Uber for Business for APAC, and clearly as a founder of a company, you have certain level of control, which you might not have as a person within a large, as a leader within a large organization, right? And Arjun, so my next question is to you. Uber, of course, has been through a roller coaster ride. I don't know how long you've been there, but it was touted as, it was the blue-eyed unicorn of the investors. It could do nothing wrong. It was going to disrupt transportation and many other industries. And then there were a bunch of senior management changes that happened. There were a bunch of things around culture. And of course, during this pandemic, it has been disproportionately hit because transport just as a sector has been so badly hit. And you've had to, as a company, as an organization, had to take some very tough calls. So I want to understand from you, how has that impacted you? How have you dealt with that and made sense of it? And how have you helped? I mean, how do you supported your team manage this challenge that we all are facing, but some of us can't help living through some of those decisions?
Yeah, thanks, Pooja. Thanks for that question. I've been with the company for about 4.5 years now, so I've seen some of the turbulence as well as how the company's completely reinvented itself, and I think it's phenomenal the way that the company is forging ahead. The pandemic has certainly thrown headwinds and challenges that were unexpected and particularly difficult for the travel industry, right, at a large, and we are part of that in a way. But when you diversify into other business models, you do have the ability to continue to be more resilient. So the Eats business, for instance, is that business unit of ours that's really helping in times like this. I think that's been pretty smart of the company. But kind of zooming out a little bit on your earlier allegory, where you said that you gave an example of somebody going in the current, helping them in one direction, and suddenly they're faced with unfamiliar currents and challenges, and they find it really difficult, or they have to dig deep to figure out what needs to be done. And we're seeing the same thing with people, right? I mean, they're swimming in unfamiliar waters, all of us, on this call, people in our teams, and we're all learning to, requiring to learn a new stroke, a new style in which we can raise ourselves, raise our collective team, to a performance level that helps our company, our performance, all of us individually to kind of, to flourish. So different people, we have to first understand the context of different people take things differently, so from each person's perspective, you start appreciating where they stand in the spectrum of being able to overcome and resiliently face some of these issues. You're able to better empathize and relate to the context that is required to deal with them. And sometimes some of them actually become part of your core group that helps lift the overall organization. So from that perspective, I think leaders have to be compassionate and empathetic towards how their teams are going to be able to effectively work in times like this. It definitely becomes paramount. Yeah.
Any example of that? The challenge I feel with something like an empathy, vulnerability is like we are able to say it, but it's so hard to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. Good question, right? So I'll give you an example. We sometimes take it for granted that people in our team who've been high performers, all right, are the ones that will continue to perform high despite all odds. Because you see, in our vocabulary, we've got, every company's got their cultural taxonomy, right? So you'll talk about grit and you'll talk about resilience and determination. But what you realize is that we're all human, we're all fragile and susceptible and vulnerable to different, contexts. And what COVID, quarantining and self-isolation has done is completely fracture what's construed to be normal. So if you are a very high performer, and I'm giving you a live performance from someone in my team, live example from someone in my team, one of our best performers, he lives, alone in a different country from where he is. A very energetic and very, physically active person running ultra marathons. And for the first time, you'll actually start seeing there's there's a crack in his armor. There's that chink which is getting exploited by having to be just in the four walls of a room. And then you have to understand that, and if you can catch it, because the cues are not always very obvious, the cues are very subtle, right? And so you have to sometimes force the issue, force the discussion. As uncomfortable somebody who's a high performer extrovert would be to open up and have that chat. And when you do, I think it's a little bit more liberating for you as their manager and them, and for themselves as well, right? And then you start the process. And to Ajay's point, we're not the experts on this, but your company and has to be the one that provides access to different avenues and to different help resources to be able to go and do that. And Uber has been, I think, world class, one of the best in terms of ensuring that employees have access to those assistance programs and resources, right? So that is really paramount. The other thing that I'll talk about is generally, collectively as a team, you need to also delegate effectively to people who are able to, take charge and run some of these, because there's nothing better than people taking on, certain responsibilities beyond what may now become mundane day-to-day routines, right? So I'll give you a very interesting example, and I learned a lot from it. So our India team, we usually have happy hours, right, on Fridays. And I got an invite from the team who was in charge of, setting this up for 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. on a Friday. And my initial reaction was like, that's intruding into personal time. I should probably go and tell my team that's not right. Have you thought this through? And what was very interesting was the rationale given was, if we do it in work time, it's just one of those things that we have to do. Remember, Friday evening, people used to go out. They used to go and hang out with friends. The conversation used to be not about work. It used to be all the banter that you have with your colleagues, whether it's with your colleagues or friends. And this started, mimicking that. So the way that people took up to that 7 to 9 on a Friday evening surprised me as well. And I learned a lot that we have to kind of, try and evolve what our own thinking is sometimes, because we aren't able to break free of what a work day and a work week looks like. Because it's as weird as one of my colleagues put it. It's no longer working from home, is it? It's living at the workplace. Yeah. So how do you adapt, your own understanding and appreciation of how people are, relating to this, what is possibly going to be most impactful and helpful, both for the organizational productivity, which is paramount, as if the organization prospers, you as individuals will prosper, right? So what works for the organization, and how do you toe the line between that, and what do you do to support, employees in succeeding personally and professionally?
Right. Thanks, Arjun. I think through this round of conversation, a lot of the solutions kind of have started to come out. Employee assistance program, just change in vocabulary from all hands to all hearts, just keeping your eyes and ears open for change in behavior that you're seeing. At least keeping your mind open to change of format of some of the things that we used to do. But I want to dig a little deeper into some of these interventions and what are possible avenues in which we as CXOs and leaders can start to think about in our organizations. And, Ariana Huffington has famously started, she's spoken a lot about her nervous breakdown while running Huffington Post, and she has started a whole organization around that, which is called Thrive Global. I have a very close friend who runs Visa, which is an AI-based chat support. It's like they call it the 4 a.m. friend. And this is all kind of pre-COVID-19, right? This is kind of just as our lives were. It was still all of that mental health issues were endemic. So Puneet, I'll ask you if you think technology can play any role in systematically addressing some of this. So, the challenge is that when we say, okay, keep your eyes and ears open to see for clues or to hear any signals you get, or you say, be vulnerable, be authentic. These are such soft, subjective terms. And honestly, we as leaders have not grown up on that. Corporate India, America, corporate world is a lot about effectiveness and passion and driven and results oriented and metrics oriented and all of that. So one is just even transitioning to that vocabulary, but another is to take it to some specific initiatives, specific tasks, specific projects that we can begin to drive to at least wade in these waters and understand this problem a little well. So the question is, can technology play a role, and if yes, what?
That's an interesting one, right? And my 2 cents on this, and I've been in technology for 20 years, and I'm sure many of you are very deep, right? Technology is an enabler, right? You can't really expect technology to say, listen, I'm going to solve for all of these issues. And I think just 2-3 ideas on that, right? I think number one, again, technology plays a role there, right? Leadership is still a contact sport, right? Everything is becoming contactless, from pizzas to banking to coffee to everything, right? But leadership is still a contact sport, and technology enables you to do that, right? So on an average, I used to do 10 to 15 conversations a day with customers and colleagues and partners. I've doubled that number now. Right? I'm just calling more people up, and technology helps me get there. Right. All of that, right? So that's one. Second, I think what Ajay said was really interesting, which was the say-do ratio, right? Which is your say-do ratio has to be 1:1. There's a ton of rhetoric, right? I mean, every time somebody tells me we're all in this together, I just ask them to just get out of the room, right? Just, no, we're not all in this together. We're all taking it differently, right? Which everybody is reacting differently. And how do you go from rhetoric to, and how do you make these words real emotions and actions, right? And I think that is important. On the vulnerable piece, Pooja, I agree with you. It's a very uber concept. But I think the only thing that, again, there's a left brain answer, there's a right brain answer. You can think about structured mechanisms, but I think I'll tell you one story, right? So I've been doing a weekly large group meeting where I kind of share my ideas, right? And every time I go in very strong and I go in with a clear point of view and a structure, and those conversations are okay, but not very meaningful. Last week, I had a conversation where I started with my own personal story saying, listen, by the way, guys, I'm really worried about my own father. And he's a heart patient, and we've just got an oximeter, and we're trying to figure out, should we have an oxygen tank given what's happening in Delhi and Bombay? And suddenly the tone of the conversation completely changed. It was probably the most meaningful conversation we've had as a group, because now people, and you have to lead with example, right? You think, listen, the guy's being honest and authentic and vulnerable, and he's not got everything under control. And let's talk about that, right? And then suddenly people started talking about their own emotions, and emotions are through the charts right now. And we completely dropped the agenda, and it was a really interesting conversation around what we're going through, right? So I think that, right. And then one final comment, again, I don't think it's a technology comment, but we all have to be, as leaders, we have to be hopeful, and I call it bounded optimism, right? Which is, you have to be optimistic and realistic at the same time. Nobody wants to follow a pessimistic leader, but at the same time, you can't be a blind optimist, right? So I think you have to kind of balance that off. And there's a very interesting theory around fragility. I don't know if you read this, Dr. Ben Tahar talks about this, and which is, he basically says that all complex systems, including humans and organizations and relationships, are not resilient. And again, we use this word resilient a lot. We're either fragile or anti-fragile, right? Which is, whenever a black swan event like this happens, you either come out of this much stronger or you come out of this much weaker. You never go back to your normal, right? And the difference between those two data sets is the intention, the level of engagement, the way you frame this, the way you go into this, right? So one of the questions I ask in all my business reviews is, even the ones which are not, the business is not doing well, what are we doing to prepare for when the business doubles, right? How are you thinking about a more optimistic framing and how a more positive framing? And that's where, one more thing, and then I'll shut up on this, right? Which is what I call the butterfly effect. And it's even more relevant today. Another story, a few weeks ago, some small group in one of my teams, there's an individual who shared a very interesting story of how she helped somebody in her team. And she sent that mail out to a small group, and suddenly it kind of went to different parts of the organization. It came to me, and I kind of blasted off, and it became viral. And for 15 minutes, I was smiling and I was happy. Yeah. After kind of reading that email and sending that email around, it's a true butterfly effect, right? And I'm pretty positive that for 15, 20 minutes that day, my entire team around India and different parts of the world were happy and positive, right? And it was a small 2-liner email around something that somebody did, right? So again, long story. Keep an eye on your say-do ratio. If you're saying be vulnerable, then be authentic and just let your guard down and be hopeful and positive, and kind of, they say fear is contagious, so is courage, right? So spread courage and spread as much positivity as you can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks. Thanks, Puneet. As you can see, I have a long list of questions, and this is never ending. So just for the audience, I'll take a break. If there are any questions you have for the panelists, please put it in the chat video, and we are going to try and address this. please mention the speaker who you want to address it to, or just generally to the panel. Meenakshi Dhar, absolutely. People want to be listened to, not just heard. And yes, we've not touched upon that very, very critical skill of listening, which is really an acquired skill. So I'll actually open this to the panel in terms of this question of, can technology help us in any significant way in creating a systemic solution to one, realizing that such a problem exists, and two, addressing it, and three, supporting an individual or a team going through that turmoil.
Can I comment on that? I just wanted to add to.
Absolutely.
So I agree with Puneet. It's technology can enable something, but it cannot necessarily be, the front. It can be the front end of it, but I don't think that's the only solution. I think most solutions in this space, if organizations were to be taking up the mantle of mental health in a serious sort of way, it has come over the years through legislation. If you look at, doctors in factories of, employees with over 100 factories over 100 employees need to have a physician or a doctor, an emergency medical, aid person sitting in the hospital itself, in the factory itself, right? So if we are serious about, mental health being one of those things that actually be, kind of something that needs to be taken care of, at least. And like I think Arjun or somebody was mentioning that in their organizations they have somebody who actually people can go to, maybe a counselor or a psychologist, if not a psychiatrist or whatever, but an institutional mechanism within organizations to take care of this. Like I said, I think we are not at that stage yet in India, in many companies where, we moved to the level where, we're talking about mental health and being able to take care of that. So it's beyond a mandate of many people. But I think if it is mandated legislatively for companies of a certain size and scale, that yes, you should be, kind of able to put at least one counselor or whatever. And fiction has a lot of examples of, people who have done that. Like a show called Billions has a person who actually tries to boost up people's, kind of hedge fund capabilities. But I think beyond that, if you were to look at a legislative plus technology kind of solution, that could work. But I think it has to be, especially in a country like India, unless things are mandated, it doesn't really, kind of flow through. So if one were to take that seriously, it has to start at the top. Large companies by mandate need to have something of an institutional mechanism to tackle mental health, somebody who can listen to people beyond just their colleagues or their bosses, etc. Right?
Right.
Pooja, I'll just come in over there with just one more viewpoint on that. Remember, technology is going to be as intelligent or as the person who is providing inputs to it. So, right, if you're trying to look at the two sides to this, one is trying to suss out the problem and determine whether there is an issue, and B, do something about it. All right. The issue is with people, even if they're going through some duress, it's a matter of self-esteem where people don't want to necessarily reach out. So even if you have interventions to try and determine what the issue is, it may be unwittingly gamed by the person, for whose benefit it is designed and intended. So one of the challenges is that. So I still think it requires human level intervention. I think organizations should invest more, which historically they have, but now they need to do more. But whether it's experts or whether it's training their own people to try and figure this out. There are early warning signals. People becoming a little bit introverted, a little reserved. They are more reticent. They are more negative generally. The output isn't that. The energy levels are low. So if you can suss out, look at these indicators, and then you go towards interventions after you've identified where technology can come in. I'm not sure what those exact what design principles of that look like, but I'm sure there's enough creativity out there, and this is definitely a time of opportunity. So we look forward to something coming up.
Absolutely. And Thrive Global actually is doing a lot of work on it. And I want to highlight one more point that came out of this, which is about storytelling and the micro steps there and a scale of impact it can have. As Puneet said, the butterfly effect, right? Just the idea of sharing some of these micro stories enables people to feel comfortable to talk about their own concerns. So it's up to the leaders to begin to share those stories where you can come across, you are vulnerable, you are genuinely being vulnerable, and that opens the door for a lot of people to start talking about it. Now the challenge is that once the floodgate opens, how do you deal with it, and do you as an organization build in some of the systems to actually address it rather than say, okay, this is one-off thing. Vaidheesh and Srini, you've been quiet for some time. So, I want to add another factor to the mix, and I can't help but adding it because I'm a woman, which is, what role does gender play in this whole situation? As a woman, I am cognizant of the fact that the way I deal with stress is somewhat different from the way my male counterparts deal with it. So I would love to hear from you that as a leader, do you think even in something like this, mental and emotional health, well-being, do we need different approaches for different genders?
Well, Pooja, quite interestingly, pre-COVID time, we have something called a Women Leadership Board in our company. As you know that our global CEO, for the first time, she's the lady who became a CEO even in the pharma industry, right?
Yeah.
So quite a lot of buzz that happened around the subject of women being a leader and what challenges. And she set an example of, she has 4 children, she manages, runs a global organization, right? And there's a good amount of example that is set. And during the Women Leadership Board, it's run by women. Of course, there are men who participate in this leadership committee. What I find it interesting is that, of course, you go through those transitions even during a normal time. But the test of it comes during the pandemic like this, right? Where, in fact, very interestingly, pre-COVID, we were preparing for a complete smart technology in our office, from a typical traditional office to a cabinless office to a completely digital office, where we were promoting work from home, and if it's not necessary. But quite interestingly, it looked like as if we prepared for a pandemic, and suddenly it all becoming so seamless, and people seem to be delivering, having conversation. But very important thing that comes out is what the point that you mentioned, which is the blind spot, is how the women are dealing with this. The unfortunate part is that whether you like it or not, in an Indian context, however liberated you are, when women tend to look after the home. And where now she has to look after the child, and she has to look after if the in-laws are there, parents are there, and even the husband. So quite interestingly, the meetings are being scheduled, whether it's a global meeting, regional meetings, and everybody expects the lady to be on a call. And how do we teach? One of the things that we are looking at is how do we teach women to say no to some of these calls, right? To deal, because at the end of the day, this is not a working from home. This is pandemic working from home, right?
Yeah.
So,
and also, Vaidheesh, how do we teach men to expect slightly lesser?
But there's exactly the point that is being right now. There's a lot of conversation about how do we, without feeling guilt about the fact that I'm not attending the meeting, right? There is an expectation I can call people at any time, right? Because we are not in the office. People forget that there are multiple things that are added to the so-called somebody running the household. The work has gone up by almost about double. So I fully agree with you. This is the one blind spot, I would say, as an organization that it's going through right now, resolving it. How do we be sensitive to the needs of the gender, like what you just mentioned about women as a gender? I think it's a brilliant point. Every organization need to catch the bull by horn, and particularly where the organization, a lot of women leaders are there, women workers are there in good proportion. Like, for example, we have made almost 50% of our leadership team is women, right? And we've changed it from 5%, 10%, and large number of workforce. So given that context, it is a challenge. But at the same time, you have a business results to achieve, right?
Absolutely.
And you have quarterly results still, whether you like it or not, people are still looking at quarterly results to be seen. Even though people say, no, this is pandemic, but the fact of the matter, there is the inherent pressure in the system of delivering business results. But you are right, absolutely. I think this conversation has to happen through, I think, being, as you said, authentic. And one of the initiatives that we rolled out, it's called as the BU initiative, bring the best of you in the organization, which we started pre-COVID. I think all of them are helping us for people to be open and courageous in communicating. Otherwise, it wouldn't have got communicated to start with. People are now communicating about this, and we are able to resolve and not taking this as somebody not able to deal with the workload. So I think it's a very, very important point that we need to be addressing as a company.
Absolutely. Srini?
Yeah, so I think like most Indian organizations, we are also male skewed. So, I'm not that very sensitive to women's requirement. But I think over time, with more senior leadership, women coming on board, we've got more and more sensitive. And of course, this has now kind of become a requirement for us that in every position, we look at women as an alternative all the time. Having said that, because of this low strength, we don't have like a policy around it. What we obviously have is women leadership actually pushing for that particular cause. And that actually helps in highlighting this stuff at a very higher level. So I wouldn't say there is path-breaking work that's happened, but there is a recognition that needs to happen. And there is always a recognition saying, okay, we need to be a little more lenient with women with family, with other priorities to handle when they're from work from home. So that's a good starting point of actually recognizing. But I think, I probably want to give a little bit of an example around one of the things that we have done is bringing distraction to all the chaos that's there in our lifestyle, right? So that's a very critical stuff. Like Puneet talked about that butterfly effect, that you need some positivity, you need that 15 minutes of break that you feel nice about. I guess that's something most of the organization, especially ours, are trying to do. Our HRs have been trying to run a lot of these distraction programs to take people away. Some of these are something today in a work from home environment, or at least a lockdown environment, difficult for people to achieve, which is some talent recognition, sharing of good news is around, all of that stuff. So we run this program called Prism, which actually is a very good contact program that we do with all our, we have 1,200 people across the country. We use that as a contact program, and that's usually either contests, either talent pools. These are natural. Most companies do it. But this, according to us, is not just done for the purpose of engagement. I think it also is required to distract people away from all the nonsense that are happening around us, especially with women. So much of things to do. If they can get a 2 minutes break and showcase their talent or talk about something that they want to talk about.
Yeah.
I think that's something that we've tried to do.
Great. I am cognizant of the time. It is 12:06, but there is one question that I really want to ask all the panelists before I hand it back over to Deepak, which is, as is clear through this conversation, these are stressful times, and you as leaders and CXOs hold the mantle of not just the performance of the company, but also now an additional thing of managing the well-being and health of the mental health, emotional health of your teams. What are some of the habits or routines that you have built, especially during these the COVID-19 times, to keep yourself balanced and centered as you ride this crisis? We can start. Arjun, you want to start?
Yeah, sure, Pooja. Interesting question. I was reading somewhere. It said that leaders, not selfishly speaking, but if you're leading a team, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. I think the analogy given was in an aircraft, the announcement comes, wear your mask first before helping infants and children. And I think if you are not in a good, frame of mind, it's going to definitely, you're not going to be, be able to operate at 100%, be conscious and empathetic to your teams. And then it kind of spreads and manifests across, right? So I think at a personal level, I'm a very outdoorsy person. I love to play tennis and golf. And as you can imagine, we're cloistered at home, and it is supremely frustrating not to be able to do what you did week in, week out. So you kind of pivot to what you can, right? Watching golf on TV, whether it's going and, kind of going back to your college days and figuring out what you used to do, hanging with friends, probably playing, something as silly as, video gaming on the internet with them, right? So you're trying to figure out what pockets, of activities make you happy, all right, truly are stress busters for yourself, and you indulge in that guilty pleasure, right? And it's very important, as much as your wife might tell you that what are you doing gaming, but it's very important for you to realize that it's important. And that's what you do. The other thing is you kind of also lean on people that you feel can pull you up, lift you up, right? Those who are better at having managed the situation than you're in. And just conversing with them, reaching out to them, kind of opening up a little bit, asking for advice has helped. These could be senior colleagues. They could be people who are like totally unrelated to your profession, right? A friend who's a musician, for instance, they always tend to have this very vibrant and optimistic, aura around them. Like, what's going on? So you have to kind of, and then you have to look internally for inspiration. At the end of the day, it is your responsibility. Like you say, you have the, you wear the mantle of responsibility. And if you don't level up, then, and recognize this as one of those opportunities, one of those once in a lifetime opportunities where you have to shape up, you have to grow, then you're kind of not evolving yourself the way you expect and your team expects you to. So I think it's a mix of those. You do what you can to kind of come out ahead.
Yep. Ajay?
I think, personally, I try to keep myself a little busy physically, and it helps a lot, if you ask me. And since I live in a place where I can go out and walk around and cycle around, so I was lucky enough to be able to do that a lot, because that keeps my head clear mostly. Then the other two bits I thought is probably more attitudinal. The fact that I have probably had the hindsight or the wisdom of hindsight to have seen a couple of crises, to also have that little attitude saying that, okay, this too shall pass. It's not the end of the world. And to, even if you get something like this, guys, let's not, think that's the end of the world either, right? People are recovering. More people I know who got it have recovered than, kind of got into any kind of condition. So I think not taking this that seriously itself is also, I know it's easier said than done, but at least that's what's kept me a bit sane.
Wonderful. Great. Vaidheesh?
Well, like everyone said that, physical positivity is so important. So generally, fortunately, I have a chance to go down and go for a walk in our common area. We have a good space for walks, and getting a chance to, with maintaining social distance, having a chat with some people. And as everybody is saying the same thing, I think it is the language is important, and maintaining a language of declaration of positivity is going to be so important at this time, because there's so much is happening about what is the number going up in Mumbai and so on. As if some election results are coming up. So first thing, you shut down this stuff. They're not talking election result. We know
Right.
time there are enough scientific data that's coming out. We read it once, and I know where the vaccine development is happening. So to that extent, I motivate myself by having some declaration that's positive. And fortunately, I also have a lot of these young people who call up and regarding the startup. That also keeps me quite excited about the fact that more than the people above 50s, I'm not qualifying it here. I think the young people are far more positive about the current situation, where you end up in a lot of stuff, which is very exciting stuff. What could I do this? Can I do, So you keep yourself in a very, very engaged, positive tone. Quite obviously at home, if possible, spend some time in trying to find out some cooking or something can do jointly. So the whole idea is to keep the mood positive and then have some hangouts with families, and which many people would do the same thing.
Right.
Till you go to sleep, keep the mood positive. Other than
yeah, absolutely. Srini?
Well, I mean, I don't know, contrary to others, I think I'm more busy than I'm ever before. I don't get so much of me time like I want to. I think, according to me, the productivity and workloads have actually gone up despite working from home. I always thought work from home was a good thing. I'll be able to catch up on books. I'll be able to catch up on so many things that I've missed. It does look like that's not really happening. So I'm actually, trying to push myself to get some me time. Like Ajay said, some games. Of course, I watch a lot of movies. I think one of these days I'll run out of movies on Netflix and Amazon. Because I do virtually watch a movie a day, but I do sleep very late. So that's kind of a stress buster for me, trying to take that me time out. Because you're at home all the time, most of the time. It's not as easy as what you thought it is, right? There is no 5-minute chit-chat break. There is no side tracks, and there are no social medias, and everything else is out.
Right.
What I've tried to do with the team and myself is actually we've tried to constantly think and reflect about the company's mission over and over again. I think during times like this, if you continue to articulate that and test that, what your company and company's mission is, I think that's a very positive thing. And we try to do that with senior management and leadership now, saying, okay, how is it still relevant? Post this crisis, how is it going to continue to be still relevant? And put those clear guidelines. And, I think the clarity approach for business like us, we are a knowledge business, right? We run a mutual fund, the largest mutual fund, $150 billion in assets. People are critical, and what we do is very critical. Everything that we do is very, very, it has impact on the money that we manage. So I think testing your business model, testing your company's vision in difficult times like now is, I think, what we are trying to reflect on. I think in the last few weeks, this has been top of our mind. And I do that even at me times, thinking, oh, is this still a right company to work? Do I still, is this still post-COVID? Is this still going to be a great place for employees, right? So that's something I try and do. I know it's not like something path-breaking, but I think if you do this now, I think it gets better when things get better.
Right. Puneet?
There's some fascinating ideas by my colleagues here today. I'll use 2-3 things quickly to bring this to close. I think one, Arjun covered this, right? I think there are 2 syndromes that leaders tend to fall into. One is this whole sacrifice syndrome. I'm going to do everything that I can and lift the weight of the world. And I completely agree with Arjun, right? Put the face mask on yourself and take care of yourself. The second is the victim syndrome, right? Which is saying somebody needs to rescue me, and why are all problems coming to me? And I also need downtime, all of that stuff, right? And these are all battles in our own minds, but I just kind of keep cautioning myself against falling into either of those traps and keep myself sane. I think the second thing is taking care of yourself, going beyond sleep and eating and exercise and entertainment. I think it's also about being generous and kind to yourself, right? And maybe it's more personal, right? But I tend to be very critical of my own decisions and my own actions, and I need headspace, right? And there are many ways of doing it. Some people journal, some people meditate, some people reflect, some people take a walk, whatever floats your boat. But as a leader, you've got to be able to find some headspace so that you can really kind of decouple the fiction from the facts in your mind. And then the last thing is you just, as a leader, your own personal operating model, right? And I kind of look at this now. I used to look at this every month. Now I look at it every Sunday. And there are 3 or 4 things that I look at, right? One is, what are my priorities? Going back to this piece around taking care of yourself, what are the real swing decisions I can take in the next week that will really move the needle, and everything else needs to be delegated or automated or whatever, right? So what your priorities are. Second, what roles am I playing? Am I really helping my teams think big? Am I really helping them solve problems? Am I being a shoulder to cry on? And there are multiple roles we have to play, but being conscious about that.
Yep.
Third is managing your energy, right? Which is, so I'm now become a morning person. I really want to do all my interesting problem-solving discussions in the morning. And then finally, your time. And this is something that I learned from Pradeep, Arjun. And he told me one day, and Pradeep, who runs Uber in India, and he said, how much of your agenda is driven by your priorities versus somebody else's priorities? Always go back and look at that, right? And I look at that every Sunday, saying how much of my agenda is, and at least half of it, if not more, has to be driven by things that I want to go and solve. So just kind of keeping your operating model in terms of your energy, the time, your priorities, and the role you play, and then finding some headspace.
Wonderful.
I'm trying to solve it.
Wonderful. Ajay, is that Mahesh Manjrekar? That gentleman looked like Mahesh Manjrekar who walked in. Thank you so much.
Yes, you know him or what?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you've seen him around, right? So.
Pooja Goel. I don't know whether you know Pooja.
Hi.
Hi.
Celebrity sighting.
Celebrities. Oh, sorry.
But thank you so much. I think this was extremely helpful. I will, I will share just a small anecdote from my side as to, when this whole lockdown started, for my family, there was only one. I tend to be a disciplinarian and a tough mom with routines for my children and for my family. But when the whole lockdown started, there was only one rule I said, and this was way back in March. It is just be kind and compassionate to each other. We are all going to be locked in this house, working, doing our thing. Be kind and compassionate to each other, and be kind to yourself as well. The downside of that is, in being kind to myself, I put on a lot of weight because I end up giving into my temptation of cookies and stuff. And the second point I want to bring about is, I was reflecting on it, and especially when Deepak mentioned about IntelliThoughts, there are these micro steps that you can take, especially when there is so much stress in the air surrounding you, which, this impacts the our limbic or the mammalian brain. At IntelliThoughts, we had a preschool, and parents, when they came to drop off their children, the first few days of the preschool, it was rough. It was rough for parents. It was rough for children. It was rough for teachers. This was the first time children were stepping out of their comfort zones of their homes and going into a school environment. And children would still settle, but actually parents found it very, very hard. There used to be challenges at the pickup, at the drop-off time. And we were a very neuroscience-based pedagogy. We implemented a lot of cognitive neuroscience in how we taught children and how we worked with children. So one of the things we implemented was started putting some aroma at the entryway, which was either lavender or jasmine. That was one. And the second was started playing peppy music at that time. And we did some research and collected some data before this and after this. And I can tell you that the stressful interactions between teachers and parents and children and parents actually went down by almost 90%. So, that might not be a very rational thing to do. So for us, music has been another part of our lifeline during this lockdown that has kept us sane and positive. But in any case, thank you. It's been a fascinating conversation. I have taken just so many notes and so many things to go back to my workplace with, and I hope the audiences found it useful. There were some questions that we were not able to address. Hopefully, we will be able to make this recording available. And if there are still any festering questions, we'd be happy to answer later. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Back over to you.
Pooja, thank you. Thank you so much. I think it was a very well moderated conversation, very balanced. And Vaidheesh, Trini, Ajay, Puneet, Arjun, extremely engaging and insightful, and I just hope that human really gets prioritized in the human resources, and mental well-being is just not nice to have, but it also becomes a bit of an essential in our scheme of things. And just a question which comes to my mind, the way we train few of our employees and people to to fight with fire, or how to react during the time the earthquake. Can we also train some people on how to manage the mental well-being or the mental stress of the other employees in the company? Just a thought. And CEO Lounge is just not about transformation and knowledge. It is also a bit about passion and the other side of our speakers. So we'll take a few minutes of understanding a little bit more. I have a privilege of knowing all of you a little bit. But let's expand this somewhat. So Vaidheesh, I know your interest in golf and the other sides as well, but there is one very key interest that you have is towards marketing. And especially you correlate religion and marketing so very well. Is there an anecdote that you want to share today with the audience and with all the other speakers that you probably would like to relate, or something new that you have probably learned over the last 2 months that you want to relate with the marketing and religion?
Yeah, the kind of conversation I had with you is only one-on-one. I can't be having this conversation. That's more a fun talk that we had. But one thing I can relate, which is what I was talking to someone is, see, at the end of the day, during this time, a pandemic kind of scenario, I strongly believe, whether you like it or not, that faith is going to play a very big role. Whichever faith that people have, whatever the faith that they follow, and that's going to be the backbone of how the society is going to come back and deal with this whole pandemic situation, deal with the change. So rather than trying to find out which faith is better or not, right now I think we should encourage people to have some faith in something, even if faith in the bosses or faith in the religion, or if you don't have faith, then you are likely to be very negative. You get into the mental depression because of the fact you don't have trust in your life itself, right? Right now, you need to have somebody to, like, for example, if I believe in Vedanta, I listen to Vedanta for throughout this time, because at least that make me to focus on something which I like, right? I get a chance to learn that distracts me from getting caught into this data that is coming out every day in the television, right? So I'm of the opinion, without getting into the marketing aspect of religion, which we can keep it for other session, but I strongly believe that faith makes a huge difference, particularly during these troubled times.
Great. And Srini, you probably got the best cabin view in the entire Bombay, overlooking the MCA ground, and so is there a cricket incident that's probably you remember that's remained stuck with you that you've probably seen from your office window?
Yeah, I mean, I missed that because I'm at home now, but all the green lawns of MCA and the beautiful cricket pitch. But yeah, I mean, there have been times when, because MCA, a lot of Indian cricketers come there to play. I've had an opportunity to meet some of the few legends of crickets, including Sachin. I think few times Sachin actually. He comes there to play. And
Pooja, sorry guys, I need to run because some people are waiting for me. So I'll just sign out. Okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you.
Bye.
Ajay.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Srini. Thank you, Arjun. Bye.
Ajay.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, cricket for me, cricket is and we miss all cricket, right? All of us. None of today. It's sad to see all the repeats and I've actually stopped seeing those repeats. But I wish there was a news that we will start seeing cricket from UK at least, but that also looks like that's not happening. So I miss cricket. I miss any of the sports. Like, all of us are people who want to go out and watch movies, go to restaurants, go to sports. But I miss that. But I actually miss the view from my office, which I could see for a while. I do still go to office once in a week. But what I like being at home is I get to brew more coffee. I'm a big coffee fan. I brew different kinds of coffees from all over happened. So that's an opportunity for me.
Great. We just hope that the IPL kicks off as the rumors are towards the October, November, and that happens. I think you'll see some action on the MCA ground a bit more.
Oh, by the way, I got a chance to work with some of these cricketers because for mutual fund Arré campaign, we worked with some of these cricketers during this break, and we've created some commercials which will be airing very soon. We were hoping during IPL. Now that there's no IPL, we will probably see that in some other matches. Yeah.
So Arjun, golf and tennis, we all know, and we also know that you love driving and you love going on a long drives as well. So who has been your favorite companion? Which has been your longest drive? And is there an incident that's really got stuck with you during your drive ever?
Oh, well, okay. So, yeah, I think the favorite companion definitely is my wife.
Right? Don't say Shifa. Let's go beyond her.
Yeah. Okay. Beyond Shifa, I'd say, rewinding many years, used to be a golden retriever. All right. So, but that's not necessarily a long drive, but just the joy that you see, the unbridled joy, on Dash, his neighbors, like on his face when you just kind of roll down the windows or open the doors of the car and he jumps in. So definitely like driving, I still enjoy it. Like, I'm in Mumbai, not in New Zealand, like you said at the start. So just taking advantage of the Pune-Mumbai expressway, sometimes going and playing in the lovely golf courses that are there in Pune. It's always a pleasure. Just, the occasion is driving down rather than just reaching there and playing golf. So enjoy that as well.
Great. And Puneet, your wife is a designer. So have you picked up any of the design traits and from her? Probably that would be my first question. And secondly, what kind of a leader are you? Who's your mentee? I mean, who's the person who really inspires you in your leadership traits?
Two very interesting questions. Let me start with the first one. So Priyanka, my wife, is a designer, as you said. Unfortunately, she's slowed down given just what's happening all around us. So, but we found a few other rituals that she and I kind of getting into. So we started a Friday evening cooking ritual when she and I kind of cook something different and we experiment and try new things. Most times they turn out okay, but so that's what she and I kind of doing and trying new things. On the leader question, Deepak, 2-3 things, right? I think one, I'm an optimistic, hopeful leader. At least I want to be, and again, I have a long way to go, right? I'm also a leader who wants to bring people together and be a lot more inclusive. And third, I want to think big, right? Which is go and solve. And my genuine belief is that in India, if you're in technology and if you're leading up any business or any part of any of these organizations, you're not worth your salt as a leader if you're not thinking on behalf of India. And how do you really move the country forward and beyond just the business that you run and beyond all the tech that you're developing, right? So I think that's my passion. I have many heroes. I have many heroes. Nohwar Kaka is one of them. Nohwar used to run McKinsey in India for a while. Yeah. He now runs analytics globally. And what he's taught me to be is, beyond all the intellectual horsepower that he brings to the table, is to be human. And it's unbelievable. Even now, he will call me when I've left McKinsey some time back, but every other week he'll give me a call and he'll check about how my family is doing, and he remembers my kids' names. And the conversation is not about business and content and work. It's about just being human, right? And I hope I can be half as good as him one day, but he's truly inspiring.
Wonderful. Pooja, I'm sure what's coming your way, but we love you, and your voice are the best. We know how well you sing. Maybe if I'm not putting you on a spot to sum up this entire conversation in few lines in your own style, so that would be amazing.
Oh my God. Okay, there is a Munni Begum ghazal that I like. I'll just sing the first 2 lines of that. Hoping that this pandemic goes away. Hey, mere हमनशी चल कहीं और चल इस चमन में अब अपना गुजारा नहीं बात होती गुलों तक तो सह लेते हम बात होती गुलों तक तो सह लेते हम, अब तो कांटों पे भी हक हमारा नहीं है मेरे हम नशी चल.
That was really nice, Pooja. That was
Thank
really
you.
nicely done. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to seeing you all and all the attendees. Thank you. The next weekend, 11 o'clock, on another very interesting topic with new set of leaders. Until then, thank you. Take good care of yourself. Stay healthy. Stay safe. Namaskar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Deepak.
Pooja.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.